You are now listening to theGrio's Black Podcast Network, Black Culture Amplified.
Hello and welcome back to Writing Black. I am, as always, your host, Maiysha, lifestyle editor here at theGrio. And today we have a guest I'm sure a lot of you will recognize. I'm really excited to have her here. You may recognize her as the first ever Black Bachelorette on The Bachelorette. You may recognize her as co-host of the Higher Learning podcast with Van Lathan, or you may recognize her as the author of Miss Me With That, her book of essays about her experience in the zeitgeist. But she's here today, Ms. Rachel Lindsay, or I should say Mrs. Rachel Lindsay Absolo, with her new novel, Real Love, which this is delightful. It's a little like romance, but it's also a little inspiring. We're going to get into it. Hey, Rachel, how are you doing?
I am very good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy we could make this happen.
I am too. You know, it was a pleasure. You and Van hosted me on Higher Learning right before the holidays, and I was so eager to have you on as our guest because I think you have become such a significant pop cultural figure, inadvertently in some ways.
Yeah.
I don't know if you intended it that way. We know things happen. But, you know, in terms of cultural conversations, you've been in the center of some really important ones. And this book is a departure, I think, in a way for you in terms of what you've been doing the last few years. And yet it isn't. It starts with a twist that I really enjoyed. And I don't want to spoil it for people, but I do want people to read it. And I know you drew a bit, obviously, from your own experience on television for this. Yeah. So let's talk about where the plot for Real Love came from.
Yeah. So first off, thank you for that amazing introduction.
My pleasure.
So when I was approached to write about my life, my book of essays, well, it turned out to be a book of essays, but the nonfiction book that I had this idea always. And when I was approached to write a book, initially I was like, no, I'm not ready yet. It's not time to tell my story. And I'm glad I waited because more things happened. So at the same time that I said, okay, I'm ready, I said, hey, I also have this other idea. Because of the way, now I'll preface this by saying the book is very loosely based off of my life, but it does draw inspiration of where I was at a point in my life and certain things that I went through. And I think that's why the readers will find it so relatable. So I always check myself by remembering the girl who almost said no to an experience that changed the entire course of my life. I was so ready to say no. I was looking for no's. And I'm speaking to the moment where two coworkers come into my office, knock on my door and say, hey, you should be on The Bachelor. And I laugh and I say, no, Black people don't do that show. And they said, no, if you do it, it'll be great for you. We think you would go far. And they were right. They could see something in me that I didn't see. I also wasn't daring enough to say yes initially. I was scared. And so this book, and I don't think it's necessarily giving it away, but that's where you find the protagonist of this book. She says no to going on to reality TV. And you see her explore her life in that way. And that was important for me because that was almost me. I was that girl who was checking off the boxes for her life plan. And when I go back and I look at my life plan, because I discussed that in my book of essays, it's so different from the life that I'm living now. And I am so much more happy. So I wanted to explore of what if I had said no and I stayed in that dead-end relationship. And I stayed in that job that even though it's always what I wanted to do, it wasn't fulfilling me. Life wasn't fulfilling me. And I think very often as people, we do that in certain points in our lives. And if you haven't done it yet, it will eventually come to you and you have to make this decision. And I wanted to do, and that's what's so fun about fiction, because you do get to do that when you write. And so that's kind of where the idea came from.
You know, I love that because I'm a big one on the what if narrative, right? You know, I grew up on choose your own adventure books and, you know, and you're always wondering, you know, I can definitely say for myself, like, what would have happened if I had gone left instead of right in that moment? You know, if I had, I don't know, married the first guy I fell in love with, or not gone to this school instead of this school, or, you know, and you think about all these different trajectories your life could have taken. And what I love about this protagonist, Maya, is that, as you said, she really is kind of, I always joke that there comes a point somewhere between, we talk about people talk about the Saturn return that happens in your late 20s, which is where Maya is at this point.
Yes.
For some of us late bloomers, it may have happened a little later, but there comes a point I think in most people's lives where you find yourself butting your head up against the expectations of who you thought you would be or who
Oh,
you thought you wanted to be, right?
yes.
you know? And
Yes.
so what's so refreshing here is watching this protagonist go through this and be messy in the process, and her friends are messy, like everything about it,
Well, notice
and kind of
yes.
question those life choices in real time.
The ringer on my phone goes off again. My finger hovers over the ignore button, ready to send the call to voicemail, but at the last second, I decide to answer it. What if Delilah finally came to her senses and took off to a small village in Mexico where nobody would ever recognize her from that one American TV show where she spent 12 weeks kissing strangers? That's news I'd want to hear in real time.
I also love that it's not a predictable, even though I consider it, to fall within the realm of romance to a certain extent. It's not
Yes.
exclusively that. It's just as much about friendship. It's about work. It's about self-awareness,
Yes.
self-development, all those kind of things. Why was that important to you to kind of interweave all those things together?
Yeah, I love that you said that it's not necessarily predictable. And I actually had a friend who said to me, she's like, "Oh, I don't know how people are going to feel that it's in this genre because it doesn't happen a certain way." And I said, well, I think that's what's interesting about it because it's kind of one of the themes in the book. Life doesn't happen the way that you think it is. And I do love choose your own adventure. And I feel like that's kind of where the book takes you even towards the end without
Hmm.
giving anything away. It was because this book really does pull on some real life events for me. I wanted to explore all these things because even though this is fiction, in a lot of ways, the things that Maya goes through with family, with career, with love were very, very real to me. And I think a part of how what I guess they've gotten to know me through my podcast, or it's maybe things I do on TV, or my first book, or things that they've read about me. You know that I put it all out there. I don't like to hide things, and I feel like I get to do that in this fiction book. I really wanted to explore everything. I didn't want it to go a certain way, and I feel like that's in line with who I am. And then another thing, being the Bachelorette, you are put up to be perfect. Like you're in
Yes.
this fairy tale world where you are the perfect woman, the most desirable woman in the country, and all these men are coming to see you, and they put you in these beautiful ball gowns, and you're made up, and your hair's always done. And I actually remember saying to Brian, now as my husband, but in the fantasy suite, I said, "You do realize I am not always this person," and that's a
Right.
part of my story that I didn't like because that's not real life. We are messy. And so I wanted the protagonist in the book to be messy. I wanted her relationships with her friends, with, who she was dating, even a little bit with her job, with her family. I wanted it to be that because I wanted it to be relatable. And so much of how people met me originally was not that. And so I wanted to explore more of that in this book because that is more me, that's more us. So it's important for me to touch on several different themes.
I love that. I love that very much. And I also love like what happens with the family in this book. 'Cause I think, as we know, Black families are their own entity
Yes.
and they come with their own set of expectations and
Yes.
desires for the success of their children and what that looks like. And you allow that to get a little messy too.
Yeah. I,
Um,
absolutely. It was
yeah.
very important for me. And, matter of fact, in the book, you see her, this isn't giving it away, she has this relationship with her sister Ella. Well, initially, when we were writing the book, there were two sisters. And that got just a little
Mm.
too messy. I have two sisters. Maybe that was just a little too real. But one of the things that I struggle with, and I've maybe been a little bit vocal about this, but I definitely talk about it in my book, are the difference in the generation of our parents and where we are now. They would
Hmm.
work to provide and to survive, and we do things out of joy and what makes us happy and to feel fulfilled. And that's a struggle that you see Maya go through in this book. And that's a struggle in Black families that you see. And so I wanted to touch on those themes as well, because that's very real. Fighting of what you're supposed to do, what you've been told to do your whole life, and that desire to please that versus what you really want to do in the one life you have to live.
Well, I want to talk a little more about what you want to do and how this book and this other thread of your career, because you have several going on right now, factors into it when we return in just a moment with more Writing Black and more Rachel Lindsay. All right, and we are back with Rachel Lindsay and more Writing Black. We are discussing Rachel's new book, Real Love, which is a novel, which is her first foray into the genre that I know of. Now, did you write stories as a kid? Was this like, you said this was kind of an idea you had for a while, but was this something you had been fleshing out for a while, like little sketches, if as it were?
So what's interesting is I used to not like to read. I did
we hear
not.
that a lot.
My sisters were the readers. I was the middle child. I was always playing make-believe. I was always imagining things. So I was that child. So I didn't write it down. I didn't necessarily read about it. I was always acting it out and living in this fantasy world. That was the kid I was. And then as I got into high school, I just had an English teacher, shout out to Mrs. Merriman, AP English, who just really influenced me, and I just felt inspired, and we would do a lot of creative writing, and I loved it. And then I dated this guy who went to the art school. I was a private school. He went to the art school across the way. We went to school in downtown Dallas, and I was so inspired by him and his friend group. They literally went to Fame, the school in Fame. You go to the school, kids were singing, they were playing instruments. He was an actor. And so he would write, and we would go to poetry clubs, and it just opened my eyes to a whole nother world. And I just felt so free and more myself than ever during that time period. And it was so different from the path that I was on of like, nope, I'm going to, school for political science, government. I'm going to go to law school. I'm going to do these things. It was just so different. And it was also a form of rebellion because my parents were not into the guy that I was dating at all. But I loved that. But it sparked something within me. And then I stopped doing the creative writing. I stopped, I'm going to say sketches of poetry because I never really wrote out a full poem except for my pals. And when I started to go down the path of law, I would constantly say that stifled my creativity. And so I feel that freedom that I felt before, because you're trained to write like a robot in a specific formula. And I hated that. And so this has like reinvigorated that spirit in me of how I used to feel in high school and the beginnings of college. And so I never fully, to answer your question, wrote those things down. It was more of a feeling that I had and a desire. So it's been really fun to tap back into that and feel that way again.
Well, it very much also parallels your heroine. And I got to say, as a performer turned writer, editor, who is the daughter of an attorney and partnered with an actor, I totally related to everything you just said. I was like, I'm here with you.
Yes. I still can't believe my parents never put me in plays. We would go to the children's theater and watch the plays. And then I would go and act them out in my living room and use my sister and stuff as props, but they never let me.
Not your sister as a prop.
Use my sister. So I was like, you're going to be this person. You're going to be this. And
you are the tree.
Be a lawyer.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I want to dig into that. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back with more Writing Black with Rachel Lindsay. All right, Rachel, we are back. You were just cracking me up. We were talking about, it brought back so much to me as a former little musical theater kid.
Yeah.
Of those performances in the living room. I know them well. It also made me think while you were talking about how you really, in the end, and I think this is something that really comes out in the book, in the end, the only thing keeping you from your destiny is you, right?
But
Because, this is exactly, I mean, it's very similar. What you just described is very similar to Maiya's journey in terms of finding this way back to who she was originally. And I think so many of us get obsessed with growing up that we forget that we forget the magic, but we also forget that that purpose usually reveals itself to us pretty early on, who we're meant to be. And in that childhood joy, there's a lot of adult fulfillment, you can find, in this book, you refer to Maiyya as having at different intervals, she's referred to as having a midlife crisis or maybe a quarter life crisis. I like to call it the third life, the third life reckoning, where you're at that third of your life point and you're like, what's it all about?
Yes. Yes.
Another thing that really fascinated me, though, we were just talking about Black families, and I do think that I would be remiss, and I think you've talked about this a lot, so I'm sure you're prepared to talk about it. You set this Black character in this world, where in this very multiracial world, and just like in your own experience being on The Bachelor, just like in life, who she ends up with is not necessarily who she starts with or who one might expect or who one might desire for her to be with. Why was that a strategic choice for you in terms of the way that you wrote this book? Or was it just, hey, this is how I want to write. I want to just be like, focus on the humanity of all of this situation. I mean, obviously Maiya's race is a factor and it does come in, but it's not a traditional like Black narrative in that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. To the latter of what you were saying, I do think for me it was about the humanity, but also mirroring how my life is. Yes, I'm a Black woman. Yes, I was raised by 2 Black parents, and you see that in the book. You see Maiyya very much so attached to her Blackness. You see where she faces certain challenges in the book because she is a Black woman. But at the same time, I wanted to really create a diverse friend group, which you see. Someone asked me this, and I guess I thought about it subconsciously, but not necessarily in writing the book, whether or not, because a friend, Delilah, who goes on the show, she's a Latino woman. And you have yet to see a Latina Bachelorette. So she was the first. And someone said, well, did you want to explore some of the same issues that you explored going on reality TV and had to come, to grips with as a first? Did you want Delilah to experience that? And I thought, no, because I felt like the focus of the book is Maiyya.
Yes.
And her journey as a Black woman in this multiracial world, in this diverse world, in this certain upbringing that she had coming up. And I didn't want it to get too muddy, so I didn't do that. But it was very important for me, or I just wanted to have a diverse world because, again, they're Easter eggs of me, of my life in this book. But I just thought that was important.
Thinking about this while you were talking about Delilah, I thought to myself, also, would that have brought you into a realm that maybe wasn't totally your story to tell, like culturally, like in terms of those cultural nuances that maybe would have been foreign to you? Which is not to say we can't write about other people's cultures, but I think like there's a world of difference in terms of, coming from a more marginalized group and being able to talk about the mainstream that most of us in one way or another, figure out how to at least, figure out how to navigate, you know what I mean? Whether that means assimilating in certain ways or code switching or however that manifests, or deciding not to code switch, whatever that looks like for you. And the other way around. And I think, what strikes me here too is that, what we always have to come back to is that there is no one Black experience, right? We have commonalities and we have community and we have, points of bonding, and that's what's so beautiful about it.
Yes.
It's one of the blessings of being marginalized, if you will. But it's also, there are as many Black experiences as there are Black people. So that is also, I think, a refreshing thing about this book. It's also a refreshing thing, I think, about you and the way you've kind of chosen to, present the way your own fairy tale, if we'll call it, however, however we want to say, has spun out. So yeah, I'm intrigued by that. I also want to, I want to talk about the craft of writing. We're going to do that in just a second, because we do need to take a quick break, but we'll be back with Rachel Lindsay and more Writing Black. All right, we are back with Rachel Lindsay and more Writing Black and the book Real Love. You are into romance or fiction. I don't, you can call it a beach read. I cozied up with it in bed. It's still pretty cold
Oh,
here in Chicago, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. So I say however you get into it, get into it. It is an easy and fun read, but a thoughtful one as well. And those things don't always all go together. But I want to talk about the craft of this. I mean, you were saying that you didn't grow up loving to read. You did grow up making up stories. This is not your first book, so you were familiar, obviously, with like the publishing process, the editing process, but world building, no matter how familiar the world is a totally different muscle. I mean, I know
yes.
it's one that actually, I'll be perfectly transparent. As a longtime writer, world building intimidates me seriously. It's one of the
Yeah.
things that fascinates me so much about the people I get to interview here. It might even be a little bit why I created this podcast, because I was like, I'm fascinated by craft, and I would love to know how long this took, how you envision this world, which is set in Miami.
Mhm.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah. So I am a person who likes to be upfront and honest and not pretend like I can do absolutely everything myself. And that is this book.
You don't have Superwoman complex? Come on now.
Not at all, maybe to a fault. I had the best help on this book with Alexa Martin, who is an incredible author.
Fabulous.
So I knew very quickly, I knew I had the idea. I knew I had the vision, but I knew I needed help. And as you beautifully laid out, this is not my world. I have never had to build a story in this way, to develop characters in this way, even if I had this idea. And so very, very early on, I was able to interview other authors. It was very important for me to have a Black woman as the author who could understand me, has her own experiences that she might put into this book as well. And I also just wanted to relate and connect to her. And so I interviewed a few, and Alexa was someone that I met, and we just immediately clicked. We have a love for the same things. She comes from the sports world. Her husband was an athlete. And then just also, being a Black woman. So I worked like right with Alexa on this, and I told her my idea to see if she was even into it, if she loved it. She got it immediately, had some of her own ideas. And from then, she kind of helped me out of like, okay, who are the characters that you want? Who are the supporting characters that you want? Where do you want this to set? What type of job? Questions you think about, but you don't really think about as you're talking about building. What do you want her job to be? It changed so much. Just like I told you, the sisters, there were two originally. We got it down to one. There were more friends in this book. It got a little too messy and convoluted, so we changed that as well. The setting where she came from, her relationship with her sisters and her family actually changed. It was a lot of back and forth, talking to one another, flushing that out, pushing each other the storyline. The book wasn't called Real Love at first. Even thinking of how much we wanted to incorporate the reality TV show to where it wasn't as much of a character and more into the background. Initially, the book was more of a character. It was more of a sliding doors book, and we had to not make it that and flush it out a little bit more to make it something different, to make it real love, to make it stand out on its own. There were certain themes that I wanted to express. There were certain ways that I wanted the book to go. And to your point, something that we talked about at the beginning, a romance novel, women's fiction is supposed to go a particular way. And that was
there's a formula,
I didn't realize the formula. I just more had the idea and where I wanted it to go.
Shout out to Alexa. Shout out to Black women in general. And I love, listen, I love on this podcast when we have a writer who's worked with another writer to produce something. I love when they shout them out. I think, those big assists, whether they be ghostwriters, whoever they are, however they function, collaborators, et cetera, they really are the backbone, and they often are unsung. So it's very exciting to me that you're so eager to shout her out.
Yeah.
And, I also think I love the idea of learning a formula so that you can break it, because, real love doesn't totally as we talked about earlier, it doesn't totally fit. It's not totally formulaic in that way. And I personally found that a good thing. I really like that. And I just want to clarify, when you say a sliding doors novel, I'm assuming you're referring to the film
Yes.
with Gwyneth Paltrow, where it really is a what if, like
Uh-huh.
literally, like what if I made it into the train on time. Also fascinating. And we're going to talk more about that when we come back with more Writing Black. All right, we are back with more Writing Black and Rachel Lindsay talking about her new novel, her first, Real Love. Do you think there are more novels in your future? Now that you've done this, I know you had help, but based on what you've learned, any more novels ahead of you?
I really hope so. I would say that that's the goal. The idea just has to come, and it has to be something that's original. You know, I don't want to read a book and say, oh my gosh, I just fell in love with this book. And then that gets stuck in your head and that idea. I hope that there is, because I had so much fun during this process, and it's so incredible and freeing, and just the escapism that is involved in writing and fiction, the places that you can go. It's limitless. And I didn't even feel that initially when I had the idea. It didn't happen until the whole process started. So I really, really hope so. I'd be disappointed with myself if it does.
Yeah, I mean, I will admit, when you were sitting there talking about Delilah, I was like, that sounds like a whole spinoff of this novel. Like, that's just another novel. Like, and then, because everybody wants to know, like, how the sausage was made back there at the Bachelorette. Let me tell you, we're all sitting there like, what happened? What happened? Like, even that you have a scene, again, we hesitate to spoil, but I think we could tell this scene without spoiling it. Because you have this, and this is a really great device that you and Alexa developed here, the story within a story. We love that. We love that, that mechanism. And of course, the story within the story here is that Real Love, which, to our listeners, is both the title of the book and the name of the fictional reality show that Maya says no to. But we do get glimpses of this theoretical show, and there's like a really, really ridiculous scene where the Bachelorette in question, the star, and her suitors are on a farm, and mayhem ensues. Really messy farm-like mayhem ensues. And I was kind of tickled by the whole thing. I just thought it was so funny because I was like, this is exactly the kind of stuff that we look for. Those of us, listen, I have a family of Black women who literally, there's like a whole thread in our family where, they go back and forth about The Bachelorette each season. They were thrilled when you were on. So it was like a very big deal in my family. So I was tickled by that. But I am also, tickled by the idea of you doing more fiction, because I think this idea of the heroine of a romance reality series going on to write romance novels is kind of amazing. It's kind of ingenious, man.
I'd like to think I'm that much of a genius.
It's marketing genius. I'm going to say it's really good.
I really it was such an untold story in my head that I play out all the time, more so to humble myself more than anything else.
Oh, wow.
To think about that, to always remember, because all of this happened to me so quickly. And in my mind, that means I can lose it just as quickly.
Good for
and
you.
So I always want to check myself and say, to be grateful of everything that's happening and these opportunities, and not forget that girl who was sitting in her office that day, probably not working, looking out the window, waiting for somebody to knock on the door until she heard that knock. And I just always remember that. And I often say to myself, okay, it's Thursday, it's this time of day. What would I have been doing if I had said no? I do that all the time. And that humbles me to be grateful of currently what's happening. So because that's always been in my head, I really wanted to see that play out.
I think that's so, that humility is refreshing. We're going to take one more break, and we'll be back with Rachel Lindsay in just a moment. All right, we are back with more Writing Black and Rachel Lindsay. Rachel, as you said, there's Easter eggs of you all over Real Love. And even though it's fiction, obviously you are not the only, I assume, real life person who gets referred to here. Were you concerned about, like, your family, your husband, your friends, like, how they were being portrayed?
Good question. No, I was more
Good.
concerned with that when I wrote the book of essays because
Wow.
it was
Yeah.
real and I changed names and those were real people, real events that were happening. And that was also tricky because I didn't want to tell somebody else's story. I wanted to tell my story. So it was a fine line to walk to make sure I wasn't telling too much of their business. I was trying to be respectful. It's not a tell-all. I wasn't trying to blast anyone. I just wanted to tell my story.
Yeah.
So in the fiction version, I can tap into some of those things that I didn't want to tell in the real book, and I can play them out. So even Vaughn, aka Ralph, in the book, who's Maya's boyfriend, is a combination of exes for me. Absolutely.
I love a hybrid situation. I love it.
Maybe some
A composite character.
and maybe one ex more than another. You know who you are.
You know who you are. Yes.
You are. So that was important. I got to flush some of the messiness out that I couldn't talk about in the book. I mean, in my book of essays.
Yeah.
My family, I've been very open about, coming from this picture perfect Cosby-like family and this desire to please my father and to follow in his footsteps. And that's not necessarily how it is with Maya, with the father-daughter relationship, but there is a relationship like that in the book, and the fear of disappointment. And then you realize, what are you doing this for? Because they ain't always as perfect as we think they are either. And so there's truth in that as well. There's certain things that I've learned about my family as an adult that I didn't put in the either book, that I'm like, man, if you had told me that when I was younger, do you know how much that could have helped me in certain things that I was going through? That's a theme in the book. So yeah, I'm not worried in the fiction book because here's the beauty of it. It's fiction.
That's true.
If
I hadn't really thought that right.
That's on you.
Listen, that part right there, the novelist Anne Lamott, I'm going to be paraphrasing, but she says sometimes, she says, if you would have liked me to write about you better, you should have behaved better. I mean, that's one way of doing it. But, once we get into fiction, we can say whatever we like. And, if it does not apply to you, then you needn't respond. But, I'm always interested, too, as writers, I know this can happen to me in any form of writing that I'm doing. I mean, sometimes I'm writing an article and I feel like this, if I get that point just the way that I like it. Was it cathartic? Did it feel cathartic, this book, this process? I can imagine that I hope that your book of essays was cathartic for you, but was this process equally as cathartic?
Absolutely. And in different ways. The book of essay was because I was taking control of my own story for the first time ever. Mm-hmm. And when you go on television, a reality TV show, you give up that freedom. And so the media perceives you in a certain way. The fan base does. Social media does. And I still go through that.
You are edited a certain way. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that book was cathartic in the sense that I got to tell my story my way and no one could tell me anything else about it. Mm-hmm. This was cathartic in a different way because it scratched an itch that I had of that always wondering of the what if. We all do it, which is why I think so many people will enjoy this book. And maybe it'll inspire someone to write the what if of their own story. Mm-hmm. I always wonder, because I was so wrapped up in that life of what it would have looked like if I had played it out. And so to be able to explore it, even in a fictional way, was very liberating for me because I did it. And I saw the story to the end. I don't know if that's what it would have happened or not, but it is a version of a what if. And so that was really beautiful for me. And it can keep going. The book ends a certain way. I could keep that book going and tell a whole other story about it.
And I hope that people respond to this book and that the demand is there for you to write that book, because it really is a good time. And, on that note, you talked about a couple of things here in terms of, that we all kind of do this and we, and inspiring others to kind of imagine and maybe even put to the page. I mean, it inspired me. So, there's that. But who do you hope reads this book? I mean, who do you see as the ideal audience for Real Love?
That's so good. I would say this book is it can be for anyone because it's about being at a crossroads, but it's mainly for women. And I would definitely say for women in their 20s and women in their 30s, it could really be any age, but I see it as 20s and 30s just because I feel like that's that point in life where, you know, you're making those, you start to see things in a different way.
This book is dedicated to all of those held captive to their life plans. Free yourself. All of those who are wondering what is on the other side of the rainbow. Go look for yourself. All of those who are ready to take flight but are too afraid to try. Soar.
Okay, I'm gonna even take it back. I am fascinated right now with adulthood and the things that we question about life and adulthood that our parents never talked to us about. There's this great movie called Somebody I Used to Know that just came out.
I just watched this. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I think yes. It's on Prime, right? With Jay Ellis and Allison Brie. Yes.
I felt like I could write an essay on the book because it kind of explores a what if. But you're questioning things in adulthood of like, I built my entire life around something, and what if that is not what I was supposed to do?
Yeah.
And there's the song Landslide deals with that. There's just so much that as I get older, I think about that. There's a great show, Fleischman in Trouble, that talks about that as well. And so now I'm getting lost in what I was talking.
Awesome show. Listen, we can sit here and talk pop culture every day, all day, because I remember, listen, Fleischman in Trouble, if you guys haven't seen it, and this is an interesting conversation for two Black women to be having because we are not featured in that narrative.
Not at all.
But what it was wild, deviating, we're talking about writing though, and it's great writing. And it really, I think for women, of a certain age, who are really looking at that adulthood question. I finished that show and I was sobbing, and my partner was like, he's like, what is going on? Like, what is happening? Because it was not happening for him. He had like fallen asleep, and I'm like, it's just so true.
So that is that I want to be the reader of this story, because that person who is wondering, who is questioning, who doesn't feel fulfilled, who is saying, I lived this life this way, but I feel like there's something more out there. This book is for you. This book is for someone who has trouble with something that you said earlier in the podcast about how, you're your own worst enemy and you're the one holding yourself back from what it is that you really want to do. That person who's scared to take that leap of faith, who's almost there, they just need that push. That's who this book is for. Whether it's a career choice, whether it's a love choice, whether it's confronting family. I know that I was able to come to all of that, one, with therapy, but also just finally saying yes and choosing to live the life that I want to live and not the life that somebody else has told me I'm supposed to live.
So it sounds like you said yes and no.
Yes, I know. And you would think
those boundaries, man, those are important.
And I'm talking to my parents, and they know this. You would think that they picked this life for me. Oh, I always knew that this is what you were going to do.
I know.
Okay.
I love it. I think we have the same parents too. But, this is a question we ask everybody who comes on the podcast. And we just talked about a few narratives that really inspired you. I'm not going to assume that you love reading any more than you used to, but are there some specific authors or even like shows, things that you're loving now, like the stories that are being told that you really respond to?
Well, I named two, Somebody I Used to Know, the movie, and Fleischman in Trouble. I'm just very into questions about life and just adulthood and things thinking they're supposed to go away and they don't. I'm fascinated by it. Even in Fleischman in Trouble, she says which is very depressing. She says a line of, never gonna be younger than you are right now.
Right now, I know. That might be where I started sobbing.
That's so true. But I just, I love escapism, and there's just, so I'm fascinated with shows that deal with that. I'm just fascinated about questioning life. It's just so interesting. Sad, but interesting at the same time. When you and I talked on Higher Learning, we talked about 7 Days in June. And I was like, I
Did you
have
like
that
it?
book.
Did you like
I,
it?
I'm not done.
It's another what if story. Shout out to Tia Williams. Yep.
But it's so good. And I know so many people who are reading it or have read it. So that's like at the top of my list. That's a book. When I do read, I pick it up, I put it down. I just have to say something. I love the Locke sisters. There's something. I was just telling my assistant about, I have it because I pulled it out. I was like, you got to find the book Bluebird.
Okay.
You got to find the book. I love, From Scratch. And then I've just done such a deep dive on them. And I didn't even realize that I was reading, like Annika Locke's book. I sometimes don't pay attention to who's writing it. I'm just reading the story.
Yeah.
And so, which is a bad habit. But yeah, I'm loving them as well.
Listen, I think From Scratch is one of the unsung when we're talking about series that we love. So whether people engage with the written word, which, listen, written word is happening on screen too, so it's all valid. From Scratch was one of the best, kind of limited series, I thought, of the past year. And, such beautiful work from the Locke sisters, bringing that very real life, such a poignant love story to the screen, and to obviously Zoe Saldana as well. But yeah, you and I feel like you and I could really like totally key on like pretty much everything always. So I look forward to the very next time, but I just really want people right now to pick up a copy of Real Love, get into it with Rachel Lindsay. You've seen her on your screens. Maybe you've seen her on Extra. If you're not listening to the podcast, you should. Higher Learning is big fun, but also pick up this book if you want a little escape, because it's a good time, and you will undoubtedly see yourself in it, because we've all been there. But Rachel, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This was so fun.
I really enjoyed this. I cannot say this enough. It's such a beautiful conversation. And you're right. We could key all
love
day.
it.
If I come to Chicago, I will let you know.
Please come through. All right.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, guys. That's it for Writing Black this week. And thank you, Rachel Lindsay.
Witty, honest, entertaining. Introducing Dear Culture with Panama Jackson on the Griot Black Podcast Network. Listen today on the Griot mobile app for all the Black culture debates you don't want to miss. Also available wherever great podcasts are heard.
How much fun was that chat? Listen, I could have talked to Rachel all day, but it's time for the part of our show that I also love, which is my favorites. This is where I recommend some of my favorite books. And this week, I'm also going to recommend one that came up in this podcast. It's so, unfortunately, still too rare for Black women to see themselves as the heroine in romance novels, for that action and that attraction to be centered around us, which is why I love this book by Tia Williams, 7 Days in June. I believe this came out in 2020, maybe even 2019, but it's a fantastic book. This was, for me, it was a quarantine read. I really, again, settled down with this book, and it was so good, and it's really multidimensional. It explores not just attraction and romance and sexuality and all those good and spicy things. It also explores how we process trauma, how we deal with family and loss, and forming new bonds. Parenthood is a factor in this. So I highly recommend this read. I think you'll see yourself in it. No matter who you are. Tia Williams is a fantastic storyteller. She's been at this a long time, and she's also a delightful human being. So highly recommend 7 Days in June. That's my favorite for this week. And we will see you next week with another episode of Writing Black. Thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode of Writing Black. As always, you can find us on the Griot app or wherever you find your podcasts.
I'm political scientist, author, and professor Dr. Christina Greer, and I'm host of The Blackest Questions on the Griot's Black Podcast Network. This person invented ranch dressing around 1950. Who are they?
I have no idea.
This all began as an exclusive Black History trivia party at my home in Harlem with family and friends. And they got so popular, it seemed only right to share the fun with our Griot listeners. Each week, we invite a familiar face on the podcast to play. What was the name of the person who was an enslaved chief cook for George Washington and later ran away to freedom? In 1868, this university was the first in the country to open a medical school that welcomed medical students of all races, genders, and social classes. What university was it?
No, this is why I like doing stuff with you, because I leave educated. I was not taught this in Alabama public schools.
Question number 3, you ready?
Yes. Let me try to redeem myself.
How did we go from Kwanzaa to like these obscure?
Sport, darling.
This is like the New York Times crossword from a Monday to a Saturday.
Right or wrong? Because all we care about is the journey and having some fun while we do it.
I'm excited and also a little nervous.
Oh, listen, no need to be nervous. And as I tell all of my guests, this is an opportunity for us to educate ourselves because Black history is American history. So we're just going to have some fun. Listen, some people get 0 out of 5. Some people get 5 out of 5. It doesn't matter. We're just going to be on a little intellectual journey together.
LaToya Cantrell?
That's right. Mayor LaToya Cantrell.
Hercules Posey.
Born in 1754, and he was a member of the Mount Vernon slave community, widely admired for his culinary skills.
I'm going to guess Afro-punk.
Close. It's Afro Nation. So last year, according to my research, it's Samuel Wilson, aka Falcon.
Wrong. Wrong. I am disputing this.
I'm very 99.9999 sure that it is Representative John Lewis, who is also from the state of Alabama. That lets you know, Christina, we got some goodness come out of Alabama.
There's something in the water in Alabama, and you are absolutely correct.
The harder they come.
Close.
Oh, wait. The harder they fall?
That's right. I'm one of those people that just changes one word.
I mean, I know the song too well.
I just don't know nothing today.
It's
I'm going to pour myself a little water while you tell me the answer.
The answer is Seneca Village, which began in 1825 with the purchase of land by a trustee of the AME Zion Church.
You know why games like this make me nervous? I don't know if I know enough Black. Do I know enough? How Black am I? Oh, my Lord, we gonna find out in public.
So give us a follow, subscribe, and join us on the Blackest Questions.